Welcome to 3 Minute Tech. These are the videos where we answer your technical financial planning questions without all of that jargon. Shot on location at our beautiful new offices, Level 37 QV1. Today we'll be talking about what financial advice would you give your 18-year-old self. Now we all know that hindsight has 20/20 vision. And no, we're not talking about dating advice or what bad haircut you got. We're talking about financial advice. What piece of advice could you give your 18-year-old self or your kids or your grandkids to help their financial future? And this presents some really great ideas and some interesting thoughts. As Mark Zuckerberg said, the greatest risk of all is taking no risk whatsoever. In a world that's changing so quickly, the only guaranteed way to fail is not taking any risk at all. Now, I came from a really hard-working family, and it was distilled into me to get an education and get a job. Fantastic advice. A similarly conservative approach was passed on to me in investing. It was cash is king and cash never crashes. Now, we all know that cash over the long term as an investment is probably the worst investment you can make. Inflation erodes the underlying capital that you're investing. Now, who remembers it was only a few years ago that with $10 you could buy some bread, you could buy some eggs, and you could get some cheese. Now that same $10 barely covers the cost of the cheese alone. So let's look at an example, and let's look at investing over the last 30 years. If we look at the example on screen, we can see that if we invested $10,000 30 years ago, that would now be the equivalent of roughly $35,000. Now that may sound impressive, but let's look at some of the other asset classes. If you invested in Australian fixed interest, that same $10,000 would be worth $52,000. International fixed interest, $61,000. Australian listed property, $95,000. International shares, $105,000, and Australian shares, it would be worth a whopping $138,000. The difference in the future wealth between cash and Australian shares is over $100,000, or 10 times the initial investment. This proves the point that Mark Zuckerberg was articulating earlier. The biggest risk of all is not taking any risk, and it can have huge ramifications for your financial future. Now, we often hear from our clients, "I wish I started investing earlier." Well, as the famous Chinese proverb says, when is the best time to plant a tree? It was 20 years ago. Well, when's the second best time? That's today. And the same can be said for investing. Now, let's look at an example. If you were investing to try to get $1 million by age 65, how much would you need to invest when you're age 25 versus 35 versus 45 or versus 55 years old? Now, to keep things simple, let's assume a flat rate of return of 7%. Now, if you were to begin investing at age 55, you would need to invest $5,846 per month. Now, this monthly investment reduces to $1,970 where you were to begin at age 45, or $855 per month at age 35. But let's consider, if you began, or if your children began, or your grandchildren began at 25 years old, the amount drops all the way down to $405 per month. So roughly $100 per week, and by the age of 65, you could have $1 million nest egg. This just emphasises the importance of starting early, looking at your investments, looking at your financial future, and making sure that you're prepared for what's to come. I wish I understood the power of compound interest. Well, Albert Einstein put it best. He says, "Those that understand compound interest earn it, those that don't, pay it." So what is compound interest? Well, simply put, compound interest is the process whereby your money makes you more money. And let's look at another example. Let's again assume a $10,000 initial investment. Over 20 years, we've assumed an investment return of 7%. Now, after these 20 years, that $10,000 grows to nearly $39,000. Now, of this $39,000, $10,000 is the initial investment. This is shown in grey. $14,000 is growth and earnings on the initial investment. This is shown in blue. And approximately $15,000 is attributable to earnings on your reinvested earnings, i.e. your money making you money. And this is shown in gold. It just shows the power of reinvesting, the power of having your money make you more money, and the compound effect that this can have over the longer term. So what have we learnt today? Well, we've spoken about risk and the power of taking a bit more risk. We've spoken about starting earlier. And lastly, we've covered the power of compound interest. Now, these are really fundamental but equally important topics. Good for us to know, but equally great for our kids to know and great for our grandkids to know. And the earlier we can start, the better their eventual outcome.